The canvas cloth was ripped off with a theatrical flourish. Whoosh! And a bombastic announcement. Behold! Sorosar announced with a clanny, resonant glee. His hands gestured excitedly at a motorcycle body that floated proudly, confidently, and most of all radiantly above an alabaster pillar. It looked unreal, like something out of a VR sim. A legendary endgame item bobbing up and down in midair, rotating slowly, ominously, as if it was ready to be inexplicably added to my inventory just by walking into it. I half expected a little item unlocked chime to ring at any moment. Da-na-na-na! Which it did. It took me a second to come back down from the shock factor that came with Sorosar's bombastic showmanship, as the mana radiation signatures now peaked to a variable baseline of at least 300% at any given moment. The source of this localized mana radiation burst was painfully obvious, but I found it difficult to be offended, let alone mad at Sorosar for his handiwork. This was quite literally the legacy of the V4C after all, destined to be modded and upgraded in ways that its original Martian manufacturers could have never imagined. What stood before me was simply the next stage in its evolution, a component that transcended not just its original spec sheets and manufacturer guidelines, but conventional physics itself. It was literally glowing and bleeding mana, for crying out loud. But I knew that was only the tip of the iceberg when it came to Sorosar's modifications, at least when it came to enchantments. His aesthetic modifications, on the other hand, were much more obvious. The first thing to really hit me was its paint job. Gone was the dull metallic blue of its original spec, replaced instead by a glossy sapphire sheen, complete with racing stripes. 2 parallel stripes of pure UN white that cover the front intake ducts, before tapering off sharply into small triangular tips at the end of the rear cowling. However, what really made it pop, and what was most certainly not a gun reg, was its bold and gutsy red outlines, what were essentially thin, quarter-inch thick lines of ruby red highlights that ran around the very outer edges of the bodywork. The whole thing screamed racing kit, generating an objectively cool aura that was far removed from its original paint scheme. Though to be fair, it did. "The colour palette matches your armour, Emma," Thamin commented, breaking the silence as Sorosar let out an excited, metallic squeak of joy. "I'm so glad you noticed, Prince Havenbrock," he exclaimed with a triumphant jump. "It really does," I finally chimed in, my eyes quickly honing in on the next major modification, and what could only be described as a metallic textured wax seal set atop of a thick piece of parchment beneath it. Or more accurately, the approximately 20 or so medieval-esque seals over parchments and inscriptions that now adorned every flat surface of the bodywork. The EV quickly went into overdrive trying to translate each one, while my own mind raced trying to just process the number of pages I'd need to fill in on my localized modification report. However, that wasn't even the end of it. That wasn't at all the most impressive part of the heavily modified bodywork. Indeed, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the single most Nexian thing about this. Ah! I see you've noticed the fruits of my artistically inclined side. Sorosar beamed out, pointing his fingers excitedly at the object of my newfound fixation. The gun emblem. Or rather, the most overly detailed, heavily aggrandized, medieval fantasy rendition of the gun emblem. It was, by all measures, one of the most glorious takes I've seen of it yet. Because while the gun flag had already veered dangerously away from ideal vexillological standards, Sorosar's taken it outright spat, stomped, and then kicked those rules right out of the local cluster. The Earth-Lunar combo that sat at the heart of the emblem had been replaced by a raised, embossed, hyper-colourful artistic rendition of Earth's surface, coloured in by someone who had never once seen Earth or had any frame of reference for it. And while Earth turned out surprisingly well, consisting of vibrant greens, deep yellows, a smattering of reds, browns, and even splotches of purple here and there, Luna had taken a complete 180 on its typical depictions. Whereas the grand and influential moon was always depicted as this stark, no-nonsense, all-business white and grey in most conventional media, Sorosar had simply gone wild with his interpretation of this small yet influential celestial body. Because for all intents and purposes, he simply depicted it as this bright, glowing sun. A sun with undulating colours that acted almost like a headlamp for the motorcycle itself, despite there already being a hole where the headlights would later go into. It was absolutely insane, in all the best ways possible. Moreover, I was utterly fascinated by the armourer's interpretations of the emblem, just by a visual sight of it alone, with no context, no references or anything. The cultural exchange potential and the sheer artistic weight behind this quite seriously shook me. Which was why when Sorosar started elbowing me insistently, egging me on for a response, I had but one thing to say. This is beautiful. I spoke in no uncertain terms, complete with an air of breathlessness and genuine shock.
You really think so?
Sorosar responded with anticipation, having only watched me sullenly analyse every square inch of the bodywork for what was probably a solid 10 minutes now. Yeah, honestly, this really goes above and beyond, I offered, though my tone of voice very clearly gave away the but that was soon to follow.
Though I assume you wish to know exactly what liberties I've taken, correct?
Sorosar offered, prompting me to reply with a single nod. Yep, so the emblem I get. In fact, it's honestly the part I most enjoy out of all of this. I turned to Sorosar proper, making sure to make eye contact with the professor, as much as that was possible at least. Your artistic skills are objectively impressive, Sorosar. This preamble caused the professor to rattle in place, slow at first before ramping up in speed, eventually ending up in a series of rapid-fire tiptoe stomps.
I am flattered, Emma. Thank you. I will be honest, the emblem ended up taking me as much time as the enchantments themselves.
On that note, maybe we should jump into that particular rabbit hole, I offered, garnering a nod from Sorosar as he excitedly ushered us closer to the floating bodywork. So, let's start off with the elephant in the room here. I paused, before pointing bluntly towards one of the wax paper seals. What are those?
Yeah, what are those?
Thalmin chimed in too, clearly hinting at the obscurity of this enchantment.
Ah, yes. These are the telltale signs of a man long past his prime.
Sorosar boisterously laughed in response.
For you see, these are both something of an anachronism, both culturally and magically. They are what my former contemporaries once called Firstmark seals.
Thalmin's eyes widened at that, cocking his head as he did so.
Professor, exactly how old did you say you were again? Manners, Prince Havenbrock, manners. You'd never ask a superior their age, would you?
Sorosar retorted brightly, prompting the prince to simply narrow his eyes.
I am, however, quite glad that someone of your age still remembers them, even if it may just be by name alone. Though I cannot help but to feel somewhat crestfallen, if such a time-honored tradition truly is no longer observed. No matter. Cadet Emma Booker.
Sorosar once more turned towards me.
No.
Before simply turning back to Thalmin.
Prince Havenbrock, perhaps you could tell Cadet Booker what you know of Firstmark seals,
Of course. Thalmin dipped his head slightly before turning in my direction. From what my great-uncle has told me, there's something of an ancient tradition observed in the Nexus. A blessing of sorts, but from no god in particular. It's honestly more akin to a sort of divine guarantee between the spirits that be, the armourer in question, and the commissioning client. Though beyond that, I also heard that they were also a form of cheap enchantment, one infamous for their poor quality and shoddy reliability. Thalmin spoke earnestly. Apologies if that was offensive, Professor. You wish to inquire what I knew of them, after all. Sorosar, however, didn't once show any signs of offence, as he merely responded with another solid clap of his hands.
Very good, Prince Havenbrock. 50 points. That is, if I still have the ability to assign points outside of class.
The man shrugged.
Yeah, no matter. Yes, you are quite right. At least, as it pertains to the former half of your explanation. For you see, your latter points are clearly constructed from misinformation that have accumulated over the course of millennia. Reviews from clients who knew not what they were ordering. Feedback from proprietors who understood not what they were selling. And of course, scathing criticisms from would-be riders and drivers who clearly did not read the manual nor listen to the armorer's primers.
Sorosar ranted, before letting out a metallic sigh more reminiscent of a train whistle going off.
Apologies. I simply feel slighted that the prevailing sentiments of such a time-honored technique is now dominated by the loud minority of ignorant naysayers.
Thamin and I turned to each other for a moment, exchanging confused, worried looks before Sorosar continued.
In any case, what they actually are not enchantments, but rather enhancements. Single-use performance boosters for the passive enchantments already imbued within the bodywork itself. Primed to activate once the enchantments beneath reach their natural limits.
Ah! Both Thamin and I responded simultaneously.
Yes, though I would have been a bit more verbose than myself, the armorer giggled.
Well, that explains the idiots, Thamin chided. They attempted to evaluate enhancement skills as fully realized enchantments.
Exactly, Prince Havenbrock.
Sorosar nodded profusely. Though I can also see why these enhancements fell off, Thamin added just as quickly, causing Sorosar's expressions and movements to quite literally freeze in place.
I'm sorry?
You can get enchantments nowadays with similar results. These enhancements are somewhat redundant now, Thamin responded.
Well, yes, but they are oh so inelegant, the professor shot back. Where is the artistry, the craftsmanship, the physical and tangible representation of these abilities? Bah!
Sorosar paused, turning to evade our eyes, if only for a moment.
And, these enchantments you speak of take much more time to prepare. Firstmark seals are far more forgiving given such short notice,
he quickly added under his breath. I turned to lock eyes with Thamin again, only to shrug, simultaneously. Well, perhaps we could get into exactly what enchantments you've cooked up for me, I offered, deftly putting the armourer out of his little tangent.
Of course. Well, as you can see here, I've taken the liberty of going through the typical roster of enchantments for a conveyance. These ruby-red filigrees are for fire and lightning damage protection. The metal itself is mana steel infused in my own personal infusion, thereby giving it unparalleled lightness, as well as resistance to piercing, slashing, and even blunt force damage.
I nodded along with each of those points before pointing at the white stripes. And the stripes?
Ah! They're to make your conveyance go faster.
I blinked rapidly, once more turning to face Thamin, though the prince could only cock his head in confusion.
That was a joke, Emma,
Sorosar offered sheepishly. For a moment I considered feigning a laugh just out of politeness. Then I realized it'd probably make the whole situation that much more awkward. Well, are you still debating whether or not to take it, Emma? Thamin interjected, saving us from a growing awkward silence. You kidding? Of course not. Sure is massively against regs, but given the leeway I've been granted, all I'll really be losing here is a few hours of my life at the altar of the almighty weekly action report, I chuckled. What's more, a thought slowly occurred to me today. I'm sure we'll have to come across some sort of a checkpoint along our journey, right? Either at a portal or town gate or something?
That's correct,
Thamin nodded. Right. So they'd obviously be confused by my armor as it is. Imagine their further confusion if they also have to wrap their heads around a mannerless conveyance capable of autonomous motion. Thamin's eyes widened as he quickly grasped where I was going with this. The enchantments will allow you to hide in plain sight, drawing less suspicion by virtue of the motorcycle superficially resembling any other enchanted conveyance. Bingo! I exclaimed. Sorosar's grin grew to even greater extents now, as I let out a sly sigh. I bet that was one of the justifications behind this whole thing, wasn't it, Sorosar?
Indeed it was, he beamed.
Right, then it's decided. I'll take the bodywork, I announced excitedly, before dipping my head in respect. Thank you for all the effort you put into this project. If there's anything I can do to...
There is!
Sorosar interjected immediately, his tone conveying an excited yet mischievous intent. Okay. Shoot, I responded warily. With no further words exchanged, the armourer quickly grabbed two large wheels from behind one of his many workstations. I didn't need any further explanations to realize exactly what the man wanted me to do.
Please consider...
I sighed out teasingly, smiling all the while. What have you cooked up for the tyres?
Unpuncturable rubber, naturally adaptive omni-terrain slime coating, fire tyres, and more, he beamed.
I'll take it, on the condition that you remove the fire tyres. Oh, and also the glowing sun emblem. I'm going to need you to at least turn off the glowing there too.
Deal,
Sorosar acknowledged with a grin, reaching over to shake my hand.
You can find the rest of the less fantastical modifications listed in a manual I wrote for you.
The armourer handed me a surprisingly thick booklet. With all that being said, I think I should get going, Sorosar. I really wouldn't want to take up more of your time, and I have the motorcycle to finalise and... Thamin interrupted, garnering both of our attentions.
There's the matter of your melee weapon, which we must discuss, Emma.
Oh, yeah, right. But isn't that cutting it a little too short, Thamin? I mean, the trip is tomorrow. I'm not sure if Sorosar can whip up something...
Ho ho ho! Is this another time-sensitive challenge, I hear? The armourer bellowed out.
I mean, he does have quite a fair few weapons already available, Emma. Thamin gestured around us, which, to his credit, he did have a point. I honestly don't think I can be that effective with a melee weapon this late into things, Thamin, I offered genuinely. It takes months, if not years, to master a martial art, right? I'd be more of a liability than anything if I tried flinging a sword around without proper training. And while I know that you can provide that, that's a story for when we return. Besides, I still have my knife, so with that being said...
Your knife does not have enough reach to be effective in a real-world melee, Emma, Thamin countered. But I do see your...
He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes quickly turning towards the rack of spears across from us.
Point.
The Lupinor paused, as a slight grin started forming at the edges of his snout, followed by an all-out cackle. Confusion hit me first. Then, barely a second later, a moment of realization dawned. I responded not with words, but with a series of uncontrolled wheezes that complemented Thamin's lupine cackling. Goober-to-goober communication had just been established, and poor Sorosar was left confused in our wake. Please don't tell me you're thinking what I'm thinking, I mumbled out, as Thamin went to reach for one of the long spear handles, pointing at the empty end of it.
You can keep your knife, Emma, but we're going to add some reach to it by sticking it to the end of a spear. Removable, of course, so that you can choose what configuration you prefer.
That is the wildest and most inelegant solution I've ever heard from you so far, I managed up between laughs, and I frickin' love it.
It was around that point that Sorosar appeared behind us, placing two gloved hands on either of our shoulders. Was this about a knife, Cadet Emma Booker? He questioned ominously, through a tinny breath. You didn't think to declare it on Grace Week now, did you? He urged, squeezing our shoulders in the process. It's a mannerless blade, Professor. Thamin countered defiantly for a cocky, confident breath, one that looked almost too regal for him. Oh, is that so? Sorosar continued, cocking his helmet in my direction with a loud creak.
Yep, I nodded. See? I pulled out the knife for added effect. No manner. Besides, I didn't think to declare it since I saw it more as a utility thing than a proper ceremonial weapon. You wouldn't want students to start declaring anything and everything from hairpins to toothpicks, would you, Sorosar?
No, I suppose not,
he relented, the grip on our shoulders loosening as he once more returned to his jovial state.
Right then, this should be easy enough. A shaft capable of attaching to your knife. Give me an hour. The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. His Majesty's Protector's Tower. The Dean's private-facing offices. Dean Altalan Rur Astor.
I can do it.
Arlen Ostoy spoke, his elementary excuse for a blackthorn's hood proving to be less amusing and more absurd with each passing visit.
I even volunteer for it, Professor. I have no qualms with an unprompted excursion.
No, I responded plainly, garnering an expression easily discerned from the two glowing orbs that hid neither a passing thought nor a fleeting conniption.
Don't give me that look, Apprentice Ostoy. You know as well as I that you will be without your specialty outside of the academy. The featureless elf flinched, if only momentarily, before settling back down with a disappointed gaze. Is it not possible for you to issue me a temporary warrant? I am certain that with these exceptional circumstances. You of all people should know how restrictive your skill sets are, Apprentice Ostoy. The Crown will not have a would-be obtenebrate or spectacular gallivanting around but an inch outside of our walls, I interjected, in no uncertain terms. Which is why you must remain. Ostoy's glowing eyes narrowed at that statement, prompting me to elaborate with a tired sigh. You are far too useful here, Apprentice Ostoy. I understand that a new realmer has been a matter of foremost concern as of late. However, you still have other assignments, other responsibilities to tend to. Do not allow yourself to be distracted by the novel and the new, for the brightest flames are often those that burn out first. The shadowy apprentice didn't respond, a purposeful act I took as acquiescence. Yes, Professor. Ostoy bowed. Your will be done. Good. Now, whack! Several doors slammed open at once, each one reverberating across both time and space through the hundreds of iterations of the same room, set across the infinite expanse of probability. Then came the sounds of ruffling papers and a dutifully incompetent secretary, who attempted to catch up to this unknown interloper. Professor Chiska, how did you... No, I am afraid I cannot allow you to... Whack! The door was slammed squarely in their face. A mercy, if anything. For if they'd taken but another step, they'd find themselves somewhere between here and nowhere. But not Chiska. The former adventurer was simply far too competent for her own good. My sincerest apologies for the uninvited entry, Professor Astor, but I invoke the rights of the pedagogue. I acknowledge your invocation, Professor. I spoke warmly, infuriating the agitated professor even more so. Proceed. Conspiring to interfere with the quest for the ever-blooming blossom, by means of dispatching an attaché? A spy in all but name? The professor proclaimed proudly, slamming the courtesy letter of notice I dispatched to her scantily a half-hour prior. This prompted Ostoy to turn towards me with an expectant glare, his glowing eyes quivering if only for a moment. Invocation sustained, Professor, I admitted, garnering yet another shocked expression from the shadowy apprentice. Proceed. Professor, the apprentice began, only to be halted by a twitch in my smile. I think it's best you leave us, apprentice. You may now return to your assigned duties, I urged kindly. As you wish, Professor. Ostoy spoke as he stood up, bowing deeply, before vanishing into the Academy's ley lines. Now, Professor Chiska, I must correct you on your rather bold claims, for I am simply following in the precedent set by my predecessors. And I'm simply attempting to maintain the sanctity of tradition, Chiska countered. I am afraid the sanctity of this tradition has been sullied and codified long before your tenure, Professor. I beg your pardon? She rebutted, almost sneering her fangs at me. I admit the instances where such measures were taken are rather scarce, but that doesn't detract from the fact that there is precedence. I reached for a book, pulling one of the thousands within my drawerfuls of holding. As you can see, informal oversight attachés have been used to monitor new realmers in the rare occasions where they do partake in Academy excursions. It is all for their own good, of course. The Academy wishes to ensure their well-being, after all. We both know this is a matter far removed from the assurance of personal welfare. Retroactively justifying your current actions by drawing on past actions which just so happen to align with your own is weak justification, Professor. The Baxi snapped tersely, her sharpness and stubbornness a unique challenge, especially when set against the limp-willed Vanavan and the similarly spineless staff within my immediate sphere. Do you prefer to risk injury and death, Professor? All for the price of a misguided sense of privacy? Agency, Professor. That is what I seek from my excursions. I reiterate, Is privacy, agency, or whatever else you value truly worth the risk of injury and death? To a new roamer at that? Yes, the professor responded without hesitation. These excursions are taken entirely at their risk. This is a time for them to grow. At least that's my answer for the limited framework you forced my voice into. But we both know where the true argument lies. A moment of silence descended between us, one that was eventually punctuated by the tapping of my fingers. Do you wish to lodge an official complaint, Professor? I wish to make known my personal objection to this decision. Very well. Objection noted. I appreciate your candidness and passion, Professor. I acknowledged firmly. Will there be anything else? The exasperated look of a noble scorned quickly found itself manifesting on the backs of his features. However, instead of standing her ground or resisting the inevitable, she acquiesced. That will be all, she spoke scornfully. That was all she could do, after all. Kathunk! I found myself alone for a moment, though not for long. Kathunk! Good evening, sire! The regretfully eccentric apprentice entered the fray, dressed to the nines with both armor and equipment far too excessive for the upcoming journey. Good evening, apprentice Ral Altaria del Naya, say Antisonzia II. I see the Academy once more requires my services. The former second-rate minor noble spoke, as though he were anything but. Then again, his dedication was admirable. Yes, apprentice, you are, admittedly, the most well-acquainted with the new Roma and her compatriots so far, yes? Indeed! He bowed deeply, once again far in excess of what was necessary. Excellent. I have taken the liberty of putting both your thesis and the rest of your assignments on pause. Moreover, when you return, you will be met with both commendations and several personal guarantees, provided, of course, you return with something to report. I will indeed, sire. I assuredly will, the apprentice exclaimed. Good. You recall all the details of your assignment, yes? Aye! Track, observe, but do not interfere! Apt. Quite apt. Now, you will be assigned a tracker and a map. I paused, placing both items on the desk in front of us. The apprentice was quick to reach for both, prompting me to swat his hand away. Do not lose the latter, and be grievously cautious with the former. You know what this is, don't you? I questioned sternly, floating up a satin marble between my fingers. Yes, sire. Then you know how sensitive it is. Make sure you know exactly where you're planting this, lest it fuse to you. Yes, sire. Your will be done. The next day. Dragon's Heart Tower, level 23, residence 30. Emma and Thasia's room. Local time 0800 hours. Emma. Quest for the ever-blooming blossom. T-minus 5 hours and counting. I would have been sweating bullets if it wasn't for the climate control in the suit. The entire night had been one big frantic last-minute nightmare. From equipment checklists and supply pack overhauls, to the motorcycle itself that had taken a little bit more fiddling with than I expected, there was quite literally no sleep to be had. Just work. Though, thankfully, I was now at the final stretch. All three watched in silent confusion at the final hour as I moved to one of the dismantled containers, especially as I grabbed and installed both wires and cameras from its remains. Emma, exactly what are you doing? Thasia spoke up first. Remember how I managed to grab footage of Maltori taking one of the containers, Thasia? Yes. Well, that's thanks to the cameras embedded in them. Now, these cameras are modular and are designed to be easily integrated into the rest of my equipment roster. Thankfully, Sorosar managed to poke holes exactly as the spec sheets required him to, so it's just a simple fitting and wiring job now. Elfroma, while I would argue that this is an exercise in paranoid futility, I will instead defer to a more constructive point, Eleanor began, and in a surprising act of lucidity, pushed to help instead of merely complaining. You need not fear theft from commoners. The average commoner will be far too fearful of tampering with items belonging to nobility. What you must be wary of, however, are your fellow The Venerian paused, as if attempting to backtrack an unfortunate allusion he was about to make. Ahem. Pears. Thanks for the pointers there, Eleanor, I responded appreciatively, before turning to Thalmin. The Academy wants all conveyances lined up in front at the starting line, right?
That's correct, the Prince nodded. I've already had Timberborn delivered.
Right. I'll get the V4C set up right next to Timberborn then, I nodded.
Aren't you going to christen your conveyance, Emma? Thalmin pondered.
Oh? Huh. Yeah, that actually sort of just slipped my mind. I'm genuinely blanking out right now, so let's just stick with V4C until something pops up. We should be going soon, Thacia quickly chimed in. We have classes, and the two of you... Need to go to orientation, yeah, I interrupted. We're set to leave after lunch, so we'll get to say our goodbyes then, alright? All four of us stood in silence for a moment, nodding, as I pointed to a list of printed pointers we spent most of last night going over. Just refer to that if anything comes up regarding my tent and setup.
The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. Hall of Champions. Living's Grand Room. Local time 1200 hours. Emma.
Quest for the ever-blooming blossom. T-1 hours and counting. Welcome, welcome, prospective pioneers, aspiring adventurers, and esteemed expeditioneers to the quest for the ever-blooming blossom. Chiska beamed out, her excitement so infectious that I was actually hyped up for what was to come next. I'll be brief. You're all retracing the steps of a legend, so naturally, you'll be finding your own way to your destinations, which, by the way, lies here. She continued, twirling a finger up before pointing to the open air behind her, a rupturing magical wave emanating from her fingertip as a map of Transgratia began to form from it, one that looked much more simplified compared to the map Sim and Co. had shown me earlier. The northernmost reaches of Transgratia, tracing the forests of Ruvina and the Narsley Pools. The top right corner of Transgratia was subsequently highlighted, leaving what was essentially our destination.
Professor, if I may.
Quiv raised his hand high. Yes, Lord Ratom.
From my discussions with the upper yearsmen and my research on the local flora and fauna of Transgratia's northern forests, I believe the Northriffian forests are also considered to be a valid destination too, no?
Very observant, Lord Ratom. Indeed they would be. However, the Academy, under the urgings of the Crown, must sadly acknowledge the inexplicable dangers of Northrifia as of late. So for your own safety, the Northriffian forests are off limits. Now, with the destination out of the way, let us discuss some rules of conduct. Chiska raised her finger once more, forcing the map upwards to reveal a set of rules written on a particularly large and old piece of parchment. Rule number 1. Always keep track of your adventure partner. Rule number 2. Do not accost the locals, for they are not yours to accost. Rule number 3.
Just outside of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. Eastern Gate. Asanjur's Landing. Local time 1210 hours. Apprentice Ral Altaria del Naya se Antisonzia II. Stealth. Speed. Agility. I move swiftly like the wind, effortlessly like a leaf, and silent like a haben jockey. Silence was my ally, and the sun was my enemy. It actually very much was my enemy, for the heat within this invisibility cloak threatened to suffocate me faster than a clenched throat tincture. I needed to act fast. I needed to finish the job swiftly. And thankfully, my target was just in sight. The mercenary prince's horse. I glided across the grass like the morning dew, my hand trembling as I approached the tame beast. Disgusting creature! Why didn't he pick something more savory, like a mono-treader? I screamed internally, pulling every trick in the book of theatre so as not to gag at the smell of this farm animal. Eventually, my eyes landed on the perfect spot for the tracker, as I couldn't help but to internally chastise the prince for the irony soon to beset him. What was once an item of protection will now be your undoing, I smiled wildly,
reaching for the mana-steel chainmail the animal wore. With one swift motion, I applied the satin marble on a patch of chainmail. The orb seamlessly, effortlessly, and quite ominously melding into the patchwork of chain mail. Then, as quickly as the process began, it ended, with not a sign of tampering, but with an appropriately lengthy giggle of victory from yours truly.
The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts, Hall of Champions, Lyring's Grand Room, local time 12:20 hours. Emma.
Quest for the Ever-Blooming Blossom, T-minus 40 minutes and counting. Rule number 21. You may use the resources of the land to fit your needs, for the Transgression Monarch has graciously granted all students a temporary warrant for land and wildlife, within reason. We do not want a repeat of the Lake Ethelocid incident. And finally, rule number 22. Once you step out of the Academy and Elisir, you are beholden to a new set of protections, distinct from that of the typical student. Details are in the pamphlets in front of you. A few snores could be heard at the end of the announcement, prompting Chiska to clear her throat before stomping hard on the ground, causing the snoozing students to be lifted high into the air on a pillar of dirt. Any of you who have slept through this mandatory orientation will remain for a second round of orientation. Those of you who remained awake and lucid for this orientation may now leave. Chiska smiled brightly. Be bold, be brash, but be safe. And most of all, have fun on your quests, students.